If I told you firepower sucked, you'd probably disagree. I mean, sure, you'd be able to fly, turn battlefields into barbecues, and even rival your friendly neighborhood avatar. But if firebending is so cool, then why does every firebender feel kind of the same? And what if I told you the key to making fire magic feel fresh again might just be the lack of control over said fire? As a kid, I loved original stories with magic systems that infused wonder in my little kid heart. And each one had their own version of a firebender. So I tried to create my own, but there was always something missing, like my drawing skills. And they still are. Luckily, my friend Gabriele is an amazing illustrator. And like me, he's been struggling with original projects of his own. So we decided to team up to conquer our problems. Which was good because we realised that making an original fire mage would require much more work than we initially thought. We'd need our own magic system, a clear idea of why fire mages existed in our world, and constraints. Let me explain. See, creative constraints are actually used by many artists, engineers, and scientists to enhance creativity. Basically, our best bet to make something unique is to create a set of extra rules. For example, a general rule with firebending is that there isn't a lot of wiggle room when it comes to the powers. You either cast the fire, bend it, or both. But if we limit ourselves to just one of these, then we have to make it original, which gives us a higher chance of coming up with something new. So we decided to focus on casting, and I began exploring natural occurrences of fire in the real world in search of inspiration. And I encountered something interesting called spontaneous combustion, which is a mysterious phenomenon where materials burst into flames without an obvious cause. At least that's what people thought, until hydrogen was discovered in 1766. And that gave me an idea. What if fire powers were somehow related to hydrogen? But what would that mean for our fire mage? Well, Gabe's early designs reminded me of the Industrial Revolution. And what was discovered towards the start of the Industrial Revolution? That's right, child labour. I mean hydrogen. Meaning that if our world existed in a similar period, people would have understood hydrogen powers as fire powers. Maybe spontaneous combustion was something that could happen to people. Men, women, kids, and even your grandma could burst into flames at any time. And so in this world, becoming a fire mage was now something to be feared. Until finally a scientist would come along and start asking the right questions. And for us, that was Raz Cosmin, our first character, which now meant we had a tool to explore our world with. But before we got to him, we still had to establish the rules of a magic system. If we're committing to hydrogen powers, then what if our entire magic system was based around the periodic table, like elemental magic by its real elements? Also, Gabe and I agreed that since our world was set during the age of scientific discovery, the magic should feel grounded. So we added a constraint that it would follow scientific principles like the law of conservation mass, which states that no matter is destroyed nor created. Which you might think is boring, but I thought was pretty cool, even though it did create a new problem, which was where the hell was the hydrogen actually coming from? Because if mages couldn't generate it themselves, then would we just have them run around with gas tanks on their backs? And that led us to another question, which was what the fuck's the point in magic at all in this case? No. Mages had to be attracting hydrogen, but how? Well, this is where Raz comes in. I decided these discoveries would be fueled not by curiosity, but by personal gain. So Raz was the owner of the Cosmin Mines, the largest mining operation in the region, and he had a problem. Despite his discovery of hydrogen explaining the fire mage's powers, there were still many cases of them spontaneously combusting in his mines, which was bizarre considering there was no hydrogen underground. So where was it all coming from? Well, Raz theorized that the mages were somehow gathering and storing hydrogen, but needed a way to prove it, so he began to dig deeper. He found that iron mages often had reddish flakes of rusting metal growing out of their skin after long months of work in the mines using their powers to extract iron ore. This discovery led him to pronounce the first rule of a magic system, the law of magnetism, which states the more a user practices polarity flux, the scientific name given to bending, the more atoms of their given element they attract over time. I think this concept is pretty cool because the law of magnetism makes the mages visually distinguishable. You could tell their level of mastery or how long they'd had their powers just by looking at the accumulation on their skin, which could also have an impact on social rankings, although people might start asking stuff like, hey, where'd you get all that gold on your face from? Which made us realise there's a slight issue, because you may be wondering, what's to stop a gold mage from, say, attracting endless gold, destabilising the economy, and plunging the world into a financial storm greater than the Great Depression, the 2008 housing market crisis, and the Panic of 1873 put together? Well, one fix we came up with was tying mage rarity to element rarity. That said, we still needed to limit how much of their element each mage could purposefully attract. And guess what actually helped with that? The law of magnetism. we decided that the build-up wouldn't just happen on the surface of the body, but deeper within, which is why you see it concentrated around areas where water tends to evaporate, like the eyes, ears, and places we decided were best not to draw on YouTube. And so for gold magic, this means a dangerous price for overuse, as the precious metal could build up in the kidneys, the liver, and even the bloodstream like cholesterol, blocking the mage's arteries and in turn causing death. So now this rule of magnetism was starting to feel like a breakthrough, and soon we realised it actually wasn't. We knew how our mages attracted hydrogen, but since it's an invisible gas, how could you visually see it on them? Also, if bending something as harmless as gold could kill you, then what about something like mercury, for example, or any of the other 30 plus elements known to be toxic to man? Wait, really 30? And at this point, it was beginning to feel like the constraints we'd given ourselves were actually turning on us. Magnetism was enough to make the system feel fresh, but not functional, which felt demoralizing. It was like if someone kicked you in your balls, but your balls were your artistic expression. One thing that was working though was I was still having a lot of fun writing Raz, and he actually had a similar problem to us. Despite his discoveries explaining why hydrogen mages were combusting in his minds, he still couldn't tell them apart from non-mages. So I thought, f it, maybe I can solve this problem through Raz. And I wrote a page of what I imagined his journal would look like. My understanding of magnetism casts a light which leads me forward through the labyrinth that is my research. But with every step I take, shadows gather behind me. I must determine who these men are who walk among my own, with fire slumbering beneath their skin. Thus I must dig deeper. But how long can a man dig before the earth above swallows him whole? Chapman, a 9 mage injured in an earlier collapse, returned to work today. I'd thought little of his condition until I saw it, his scar, lined with metallic veins. A consequence of atomic residue, I told myself. But then Chapman flexed his arm and the scar stretched, the iron bending as though it were woven into the very fabric of his flesh. Feels heavier now, he muttered, rolling his shoulder. It's in the bone, I reckon. Then it struck me. What if the build-up hadn't settled in the body? What if it had become part of his anatomy? What if the wound had healed with metal? Was this a new effect of my law of magnetism? Or was I clinging to patterns carved in coincidence? Like those poor fools who obsess over the fate of spilled salt, convinced that tossing a pinch over your shoulder restores good fortune. Only in my case, superstition might be correct, and scientific principle nothing more than misplaced faith. No, magnetism wasn't the answer. After the last combustion, the tunnel was rendered unstable and declared unsafe to retrieve the bodies. Yet the more I dwelled on it, the more the question tormented me. If magic rewrote the form, could there be a way to see it manifest in the hydrogen mage before catastrophe struck? Thus I had no other choice. I ventured into the closed-off tunnel, my lantern flickering beneath the reassuring sturdiness of a wooden beam. But after what felt like a few steps, I noticed its absence, and a chill crept in its place, along with whispers I wasn't sure I'd been hearing. I raised my lantern, daring the rickety stone to reveal something that would reshape my reality, something I could never understand, just as I feared the body awaiting me at the end of the tunnel would do. No, not one but 2 bodies. The first bore strange patches of extra fat that, unlike any tissue I had seen before, it was rigid and different in colour, richer in hydrogen. The mage's skin no doubt served as a fuel reserve, which could be turned into gas through a highly perilous act of will. The second was worse still. Ruptured sacs left behind cavernous wounds as though the explosion originated from within. These blisters must have been filled with hydrogen and ignited at the slightest source of heat, like the open flame of a davy lamp, the spark of a pickaxe hit in rock, or even the mage's own garments. Here was a phenomenon both magical and scientific, flesh mutating desperately to wield the power its host had been cursed with. And yet it was that same survival mechanism that doomed the hydrogen mage. Autonomic magic. That is what I shall call it. Yet naming it felt less like a closing theory and more akin to stepping to the edge of a cliff and seeing at last the sea, stretching further than I could grasp. No map, no shore, only endless possibility. So anyway, thank you, Raz, for solving this one. No, but in all seriousness, I think this concept of the body's subconscious use of the magic is something I rarely see pushed to its fullest potential in fantasy. Your subconscious governs 90% of your bodily functions, so why wouldn't that apply to magic? There was one thing left to fix though, and it was that in the case of the hydrogen mage, this concept made the magic system even deadlier. You can't really call yourself a firebender and also explode at the slightest spark, so we'd need to fix this, or else all of our progress would have been for nothing and we'd find ourselves creatively castrated. So the first solution we came up with was making the hydrogen mage immune to fire. But that doesn't work because of the first mutation, where the skin is literally composed of solidified hydrogen compounds. That design, by the way, was Gabe's idea, and I just think it looks so sick. But anyway, now was the moment of truth. Were these creative constraints truly going to get the better of us? Well, so far they'd pushed us to solve problems by immersing ourselves in the world we're creating. But this time I thought I'd try something different. The next logical step is to give the hydrogen mage some sort of fire-resistant suit. But how would it work, and why would Raz spend the time and the money on creating one when he could just ban the mages from his minds? Well, I came up with an interesting idea. I was developing a backstory for Raz, and I started to wonder, what if his research wasn't motivated by curiosity or greed, but by grief? Maybe he'd lost someone in an explosion. Maybe his research was a way to fix things. If he could just understand magic, then he could control it, and maybe he could prevent it from ever hurting him again. But when he found out the hydrogen mages had known about their condition all along, he realized magic wasn't the problem. It was the mages, and they were the ones who needed controlling. So he used his knowledge of magnetism and autonomic magic to create the combustion suit. A marvel of engineering, and for the hydrogen mages, a curse disguised as a gift. See, the thing is, this suit is the only way a mage can purify themselves from the excess hydrogen. Reinforced tubes channel the gas into the fingertips, where a piezoelectric crystal creates a spark, allowing the mage to burn the hydrogen safely. But this means two things. One, in order to get rid of this extra dangerous gas, a hydrogen mage has to be working for Raz in his mines. And two, the more a mage uses their powers, the more hydrogen they attract through magnetism, meaning their bodies mutate quicker through autonomic magic, which makes them even more vulnerable, which makes them need the suit even more. And so maybe now you see how fire magic can suck. So, did we succeed in making an original fire mage? I mean, kinda. One thing I learned from making this video is oftentimes the more creative constraints you give yourself, the fresher an idea can feel. You just have to sort of push past that moment where you feel stuck. So let us know what you thought in the comments, and tell us what made you want to see us cover next. Like and subscribe, please.